This is where the roots of communism reach back to. Although nowadays we perceive it as the other way around, originally in the 1800s, communism was a revamping of socialism due to its lack of popularity. And backed by these secret societies, with Frederick Engels and Karl Marx's new book, The Communist Manifesto, the seeds of this new socialism began to spread. Which brings us to present day, where communism and socialism have reached a new level of popularity, with Bernie and Cortez and kids coming out of college preaching communism at an alarming clip, and this was done on purpose. Kids going to college nationalists who love their country and coming out communism is the culmination of a slow infiltration of our society, namely our education system. Here's a former KGB agent breaking it down back in 1985.
Only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere.
So, you see that there has been a push to implement communism in this country since its inception, with one of the greatest victories being the election of 1912. Now, from the bottom up, first you have Eugene Debs, who placed fourth, who's an out-and-out socialist, received almost 1 million votes. Second, you had the incumbent President Taft, whose father, Alfonso Taft, started the Skull and Bones, another secret society bent on running the world. As the runner-up, you had Roosevelt, who ran as a progressive, which is also a leftist or socialist platform. And at the top, the winner, running on the Democrat ticket, Woodrow Wilson. Now, this is when the United States began its first legitimate shift towards communism. This is when the secret societies took full control of the U.S. See, Woodrow Wilson's top advisor was Edward Mandell House, who wrote in a book that very same year that he was working to implement socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. Edward Mandell House is also the founder of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is currently the main branch of the deep state that runs things. But true to his advisor's wishes, Woodrow Wilson implemented two major planks of the Communist Manifesto, by making the Federal Reserve our central bank and by making the income tax permanent with the 16th Amendment. And here's Representative Larry McDonald trying to expose this back in May of 1983. He died just a few months after this interview, when his Korean Airlines flight was accidentally shot down by Soviet interceptors. Here's what he had to say.
Mr. McDonald, I'm not a conspirator. I think even Buchanan would vouch for that.
Well, you are.
Robert
Wilson.
Robert Wilson. No, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Is that a conspiracy?
Well, you've certainly. Well,
let me just tell you what Newsweek says this. The John Birch Society considers communism only one arm of a master conspiracy in which socialist American insiders are plotting to establish world government. Now, it also says, and here's Director John McManus, that's your public relations director, saying that former Secretary of State Alexander Haig and CIA Director William Casey are two of these master conspirators who are plotting to establish world government. Now, what do you say? That kind of silly, asinine statement is what makes people laugh. That's the John Birch Society.
Well, Tom, I'm sure being a long-standing member of the Rockefeller apparatus and as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations of long-standing, you're fully aware that there is an elitist core in this country that has seen value in subsidizing communism or protecting communism.
It has?
Sure.
You're accusing me of subsidizing communism?
No, I'm saying
because
that
I happen to belong to a
there is an elite core.
Study group?
No, wait a minute. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society.
Well, I'm not one of them.
The
Trilateral Commission.
The Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations.
State Department, I suppose.
Well, let's face it, they've dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly.
All right, but what are they trying to do?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who are they?
the elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the
Is
Council
the
on Foreign
International
Relations.
Monetary Fund part of this?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund has certainly been set up for the purpose of facilitating that transfer of sovereignty and transfer of wealth on the road.
All right, we
to
elected
something.
Mr. Conservative.
Let me just finish the point, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of unanswered questions. That you are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignty on the road to world government. And certainly you're familiar with local professor Carroll Quigley, who's been part of your club, in which he admitted all this. And he said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the only thing I disagree is that we've worked to keep it a secret. And you see Arthur Schlesinger Jr. writing way back in 1947, says, yes, this is the hidden policy of America. But we can't tell the American public because they're too unsophisticated to see the value.
What is the instrumentality of world government? What is the
Of all the
instrumentality through
things
which...
to say about Arthur Schlesinger, that's the silliest statement I ever heard. He never made anything like
Well,
that.
let me suggest that you read the May-June issue of the Partisan Review of 1947, Tom, and you can read it for yourself. It's called
Arthur
Schlesinger
Schlesinger said there was a
Manifesto.
conspiracy, a conspiracy
Oh,
to
he didn't
promote
use
communism.
he didn't use the word conspiracy.
I
He
think
said the
so.
objective
Oh,
was
what
to
kind of
bring about...
nonsense is
Well, let me finish. I'll tell you. He said that the objective, the secret policy, which we can't tell the American public because they're not sophisticated enough to see the value, is that through a steady result of erosion of new deals, we bring the American society steadily to the left,
All right.
and through a sound concept of benign containment, we merge into the vital center of the socialist left. Those are his words, not mine.
Is read more about conspiracies, and that's why I'm interested in what
Well,
Mr.
I'll tell you what
McConnell says
you ought to
about it.
do is go back and look at your founder, Edward Mandell House, because he wrote the book Philip Drew Administrator, and in this, Colonel House said that what he envisioned for the world was a world government along socialist lines as envisioned by Karl Marx. Now, that's your leader, now, Tom, so you got to go back to the beginning.
Well,
and
his
see
leader
what
was
the
Woodrow Wilson. Do you think he was a communist?
No, I think Woodrow Wilson was his follower. I think Edward Mandell House dominated Wilson, not the other way around.
And so Edward Mandell House, that was we ought to make that clear. He was
Colonel House.
President Wilson's principal
Alter
advisor.
ego, that's correct.
Yeah. So he is the real villain from which all these conspiracies.
No. He is a major figure, but there has been, unfortunately, in the West, an element. There are good members in the Council on Foreign Relations, dedicated, patriotic people. You've had Sproul Brayton, who was a member of the Council of the Birch Society,
Bill Buckley's
and
another.
Council on Foreign Relations. You've got some dedicated people, but the driving forces have very clearly been willing to collaborate, subsidize, work for technology transfer for what they feel is some type of an accommodation and merger. And I submit this would be a disaster for the American Republic.
And that's why nothing's changed in so long. We only have the illusion of choice. Obama versus Romney were both members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Obama and McCain, both Council on Foreign Relations. Bush and Kerry, both members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Bush and Gore, even back to Bush Sr.